to the Wandering Dotterill.
Ready, go!
Raising your level of awareness about toxic cycles, intimate partner violence, and things that happen to you, it doesn't change the fact that those things have happened to you. Raising your awareness educates you to a level to where you can either stand your ground and leave the situation or continue to fall back into toxic cycles. You can't change what you've been through, but you can change today and the future. You don't have to stay stuck. I've said it more than once. You don't have to stay stuck. Things that happen to people: verbal abuse, physical abuse, belittling, manipulation, control, toxic manipulation, narcissistic manipulation. There's a plethora of things that happen in a toxic environment, either with children or full-grown adults, that continue to remain toxic. And many times people don't even realize that they're toxic till someone brings it up, or someone says, that is not okay. I'm not going to do this. I'm not allowing for this to happen to me anymore. Most generally, it's an outside source, because being involved in the toxicity, being controlled and manipulated, or swimming in a toxic environment, meaning you're in the situation, not one foot's in and one foot's out, both of your feet are in it, and you've lived through it thinking, I've overcome, and you haven't overcome anything. You're still living in it. And you're still blind to the situation. You're blind to the fact that it hasn't changed and it's not going to change until something bad happens. The statistics are interesting, especially if you start digging into scholarly journals about the subject of intimate partner violence. And as you get older, that doesn't negate the fact that it will happen again. They're finding that family members, nursing home staff, friends, and spouses will actually abuse an elderly person knowing that they have been abused before. There's actually a large number of people that have been re-abused when they move into a nursing home, or they've been re-abused because they become ill and someone moves in with them that is unstable. Then there's that gray area that people don't talk about. The vulnerability of an individual who's been victimized before. It's like opening the door to a further enemy. Someone's been completely ruined. Their life has been ruined. They try to get on track, and then they meet a new person that re-victimizes the individual. This happens more than not. That's what happened in my situation, because I didn't know that the qualities or the characteristics of the individual I was thinking would make a good partner, and not waiting long enough from one toxic situation to another, I was re-victimized. I became another statistic by placing myself in the path of abusers. If I've learned anything from toxic cycles and being a pariah, being the outcast, being the scapegoat, being the little guy, I've had to learn how to change my outlook on the situation. When you oppose the opposer, when you're using their tactics to gain a foothold in your own life, it fails drastically.
Uh-oh.
You cannot become like your enemy. You can't become the same as your enemy. You must step away and grasp the situation. Grasping. If I've learned anything from toxic cycles and being a pariah, being the outcast, being the scapegoat, being the little guy, I've had to learn how to change my outlook on the situation. When you oppose the opposer, when you're using their tactics to gain a foothold in your own life, it fails drastically. You cannot become like your enemy. You can't become the same as your enemy. You must step away and grasp the situation. Grasping. When you step away from being an opponent, being an opposition to the opposition, you have to know how to maneuver. You can't just take what I'm saying and say, this person means to oppose the opposer, stand up against the opposer and speak out. Yes, you must speak out. You must make it public. That's the only way to stand up against toxic cycles and narcissism. But you can't play their game. And it doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter if it's a parent, a child, a spouse, a brother, a sister, a coworker. You cannot stop a toxic cycle for anyone else but yourself. And the maneuver is not like football. It's not like some kind of game. You can't play the game of the toxic cycle. It's like playing a word game where you keep saying words back and forth and you'll both lose because it'll go on for hours and days and months and years. When you say you did this, I did that, let's move on, it doesn't work. When you say I don't want to be salty anymore, I forgive you, it doesn't work. I've seen people go to be 80, 90 years old that don't understand the concept of true forgiveness until they have a complete life-changing moment. And the older you get, the harder it is to do that because people are stubborn. It's unfortunate. But I've seen people shut down a conversation and walk away and never speak to that person ever again and continue in their toxicity because they're right. Because they're a right fighter.
Huh?
And they don't dare apologize or make known their mistake, because then they would be defeated. It's also a toxic cycle when the person has right fought their whole life with a defeatist attitude. They know they're wrong, yet they try to accommodate themselves with silly notions. What do I mean by that? They continue to say they're right when they know they're wrong, and they're not necessarily lying. They wouldn't want to outright lie so that they get caught. They wouldn't want to outright admit to their being wrong, or telling a story, or elongating a story, stretching the truth to make it sound mystical or unanimous with the group of toxic people. I've seen it firsthand. A group of toxic people outweigh one good person, one person that's not toxic, and they cast them to the side, and it ruins their life. This is your host, the Dingy Dotterel.
No. 3, 2, 1.
And that's when you jump to the next level. When you've already educated yourself on the flying monkeys, which is the classic definition of a group of people that support the narcissist. They support the toxic person. They support the toxic cycles, no matter how toxic they are. They don't care, as long as they get some kind of gratification out of it. They don't necessarily have to be a narcissist, and they don't necessarily have to be completely toxic themselves. They just play along long enough to hurt someone, to get some kind of gratification, to watch someone fail, because they feed off of negativity. They feed off of someone else's downfall. They feed off of negative stories. And you see it on news channels. You see it on YouTube channels. You see it on these channels where they talk about someone that has passed away from a toxic cycle or intimate partner violence, and they make light of it. And then they slant the view just enough to get enough negativity, enough of that click bait, and then they feed back into it just enough, and they're not really helping the problem. They're encouraging the toxic behavior long enough so that they get something out of it. It's a sick world we live in, and it's unfortunate, but this has happened to me, where I've tried to be friends with someone, and no matter how many times I've said, this doesn't make me feel good, I'll hang out with you, I'll go places with you, and that's when you jump to the next level. When you've already educated yourself on the flying monkeys, which is the classic definition of a group of people that support the narcissist. They support the toxic person. They support the toxic cycles, no matter how toxic they are. They don't care, as long as they get some kind of gratification out of it. They don't necessarily have to be a narcissist, and they don't necessarily have to be completely toxic themselves. They just play along long enough to hurt someone, to get some kind of gratification, to watch someone fail, because they feed off of negativity. They feed off of someone else's downfall. They feed off of negative stories. And you see it on news channels. You see it on YouTube channels. You see it on these channels where they talk about someone that has passed away from a toxic cycle or intimate partner violence and they make light of it, and then they slant the view just enough to get enough negativity, enough of that click bait, and then they feed back into it just enough, and they're not really helping the problem. They're encouraging the toxic behavior long enough so that they get something out of it. It's a sick world we live in, and it's unfortunate, but this has happened to me, where I've tried to be friends with someone, and no matter how many times I've said, this doesn't make me feel good, I'll hang out with you, I'll go places with you, and the friend that you say that you want to hang out with, and they've hurt you before, or that you were in a toxic situation before, and it feels uneasy, and you go into it with that in the back of your mind saying something's off here, and you just attracted another toxic individual, and this can go on for years and years. The situation with that is, once you start to recognize the toxic environments, the toxic people, the toxic groups of people, or the one toxic individual that creates enough atmosphere to make everybody join in the toxicity, the older you get, you will get tired of it if you actually have a conscience. And if you don't have a conscience and you like being toxic, it's always hopeful for the other people that are suffering that one individual will grow a conscience and learn, but they don't. There's always that hope, and that's what keeps people drawn to toxic individuals. That's why they can't break these cycles. They're one of the hardest things to do is to step away, not be the opposition to the opposition. For example, if a person continues to draw you into their negative attitude, they call you on the phone. Take, for instance, they call you on the phone, they dump on you. I call these people the dumpers. And why? Because they dump all of their negative past behaviors, not necessarily their own, but bad things that have been done to them, and then they go on the attack to hook you in. They say, this is what so-and-so did, and you're just like them. So that you will apologize and be hooked in to their negativity. You'll be hooked into their toxicity just for a moment, just long enough. It's like fishing. It's like casting the line out with the hook, getting a little bite, just long enough you think that they have pain from their past experiences, which they don't. They love this stuff. They love being toxic. They love being punished by others. They love being abused by others. That's the life of the narcissist. Poor is me. Woe is me. And then I'm going to drag everyone down with me just to get my moment of shining glory long enough to hurt someone so that they remember my name, so that I am the shining one in their eyes. I'm the worst person they've ever met, and I know it, but I don't care. But they don't really admit that to people that are aware of their shortcomings. They will never admit to their faults. Therefore, the toxic sludge continues to grow in their life. And it's so unfortunate because some of these people could be very productive in their families and in society, and they choose not to be because it's easier to stay in pain and blame others than to actually get underneath the festering cancer of toxic problems, toxic past mistakes, or toxic behaviors like addiction. Some people don't want to ever stop being addicted. It happens all the time with tobacco products. We get hooked. We don't want to quit, but we know it's killing us. It's the same thing with toxic relationships. We think we need that person in order to survive. And once you break a toxic cycle, it's a kick in the stomach and a slap in the face, because you realize how much time and effort you spent trying to prove to yourself that you could help that person. And that's the classic narcissistic draw of that person, going back to help them out, because abused people end up being caregivers. They end up being the one trying to fix the problem, and it doesn't work. And you have to remember, I'm not the end-all, be-all. I don't know everything about this. I've learned the hard way, being a young person growing up around toxic people and narcissistic people, and surviving, sometimes by the skin of my teeth, because I was neglected in areas that you can't neglect a child. And then the next step of that was almost losing my life, because I put my life into my own hands by allowing people to re-abuse me, bring their toxic cycles towards me. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a psychologist. And I don't have a degree in sociology. What I have a degree in is social science, and I understand cultures and people. And I do understand, by working with a lot of people, being a teacher for many years, raising my own children, and making big mistakes, making big, costly mistakes that I wouldn't wish anybody to make. But I learned the hard way. And so even at this point in my journey, I'm still learning. And I would never say to anyone, take my advice, I know everything about this, because I don't. But I can give encouragement and examples to help someone out. And of course, you should look for resources. If you're going through something like I've described so far on the podcast, seek professional resources. Educate yourself. Separate yourself from the toxicity, because in order to heal, you can't be in the middle of it. You can't be in quicksand if you're trying to get on dry land and you're flailing around. It won't work. You must make a decision and not go backwards on the decision. If you enjoy the content, please share. And once again, thank you, Spotify. Welcome to the Wandering Dotterel.